Todd Fredson. I'm grateful to be participating in the conference, at least virtually. My presentation considers a book published by Ivorian poet Azo Vauguy in 2009 in relation to the ethnic violence and civil wars of the last decade in West Africa's Ivory Coast. The presentation is titled Ivoirité, the Politics of Ethnic Identity in Azo Vauguy's Zakwato. It begins with this epigraph, a witness account excerpted from a 2001 Human Rights Watch report. The pregnant woman lost her baby. Another woman had one of her ears sewn back on. In 2009, Ivorian poet Azo Vauguy published Zakwato. It is a single book-length poem, a myth Vauguy worked for 25 years to translate out of its oral-keeping and ethnic language, Beté, into written French. The timing of its eventual publication places Zakwato in a crucial political moment. Côte d'Ivoire's first civil war from 2002 to 2007 ended with a 2008 reconciliation agreement and the promise of a presidential election. Vauguy's note of dedication in Zakwato to then-President Laurent Gbagbo offers the book in support of an ideological position. Gbagbo and his supporters promoted a rigid nationalism defined by the concept Ivoirité, which determines belonging by regional and ethnic affiliations. While rendering a thoughtful and accomplished translation of the Beté myth, Vauguy also provides an effective contour to the political rhetoric. In order to show how Vauguy manages this, I'm going to look at how the text stages its story of psychological transformation, how the notion of Ivoirité is bundled into the myth, and broadly where the text fits in the anti- and post-colonial literature of West Africa. Zakwato is a Beté myth. The Beté are southern ethnicity, as the Ivorian conflict is most often referred to in north-south terms. It's often characterized by religion after that, North Muslim, South Christian, or at least not Muslim. But the equation is reductive, as there are over 60 ethnic groups in Côte d'Ivoire, and either monotheism is hatched through an animist sensibility. To the title, Vauguy adds, Pour que ma terre ne dorme plus jamais, so that my land never sleeps again. Zakwato is the myth of a man trusted by his village to watch for an enemy force, but he falls asleep and his village is ambushed. Zakwato wakes and is faced with the massacre. Bereft, he wanders toward a distant smith who will remove his eyelids, so that his vigilance never again softens. Zakwato's journey to the straightener of iron, Zato, is a haunted journey. The tragedy that prompts it is presented en route through dream torments, recollections scarcely separate from his waking world, and less so as he travels. The fromage, baobabs, palm trees, the Iroquois with its notoriously deep roots. Zakwato prays these giants will be ripped from the ground with his words. The songs of the Chirako are the songs of sorrow. The sky inhales all the sins the earth has cried. During Zakwato's journey, the physical landscape converges with an immaterial, a spiritual realm. To overcome obstacles, manifestations of the evil that has snuffed out honest souls, Zakwato transforms himself. He becomes a snake or a bird, Gofo Niniwa, the long-legged wader bird. He shapes himself according to his encounters. Zakwato is addressed by many names, one of which, finally, is the man of many names. In West African cultures, and notably the Beté, men, sometimes women, are often given several names. Each characterizes the person based on professional functions, personal traits, talents, memorable encounters, etc. Zakwato is ultimately recognized by the mission he undertakes, named by the stages of transformation and his breaking through to a new state of mind. Heroic in cadence, tone, and diction, the poem wields abstractions such as liberty and destitution and pity. The narrative delivery is punctuated by refrains, cries as it were, and declarations, often commands. The delivery becomes incantatory. It is motivated by repetition. It rained, rained, rained. And the repetition is the onwardness of Zakwato. Vauguy employs a constant wordplay with marché, walked and worked. Il marchait, Zakwato marchait. His walk is his work. Just as the traumatic event that precipitated his journey presents itself through fragmented remembrances, the future flashes into that shared moment. What Zato is to do ripping out Zakwato's eyelids, is being accomplished by the journey itself. So long as Zakwato trains his attention on the destination, his dedication makes it metaphorically present. As Zakwato walks toward the distant forger, Zakwato's vision expands. Throughout, the story's narrator speaks of Zakwato. Zakwato woke himself, staggered, a starved chameleon. He sat, arms and legs crossed. But then also the narrator turns to address Zakwato directly. This direct address is also aimed at the reader. The reader pivots from observer, looking over the shoulder of the narrator, to participant, now aligned with Zakwato. And the narrator is Zakwato's, is our sympathetic guide, goading, instructing. Gather the moon and the sun, tip the bowl of fire and the bowl of milk, inexhaustible teats. Cradle, tomb, fanciful sourness that betrays a life spanning the angels and demons. Cruel mother, never suspected, escape of the shadows that pass in silence. The world is spilling and spilt. Country without voice, without law, without commitment, without roots, without landmarks. That voice of narration is the metacognition toward which Zakwato advances. As the reader slips into the role of Zakwato's companion, Zakwato reciprocally marches out of the book. Zakwato, in fact, must initially be summoned into the text. The book's opening passage is an invocation from which the man of many names seems to arrive. The exalting word comes to me, so that through uncooperative ears this rabble understands. The naked word finds me to reveal the truth of those who are backwards. I'm not the dew which limits its adventures to mopping up the bushes. I'm not the drizzle happy with spitting on the ground to relieve the earth's thirst. I am the thunderstorm, I am the tempest, and I am the flood. My voice breaks the enthusiasm of irrational forces. I am the feline who toys with lovers when night closes its eyes. I am the dove that carries the golden fruit of paradise under its wings. Zakwato. Enabled by the presence of a reader or listener, the narrative voice explains the conditions of Zakwato's emergence, calling for Zakwato, introducing itself as a vehicle of language, offering itself as a carrier, a path to embodiment. Zakwato is not only speaker or spoken to, he's also the speaking act. Writing in the Ivorian paper Notre Voix, Abdoulaye Viard Senago suggests that in our reading of this tragedy, we think of a scene that combines song, dance, story, tale, and myth. Poet Henri Nkomo refers to Vauguy as a neo-oralist. This long poem performs. Vauguy triangulates a space of encounter, a stage, and the reader, like the narrator and Zakwato, has a role, one that sometimes resembles that of authorship, as the narrator recedes and the voice of Zakwato, who we've been positioned alongside, makes address. There is initially a sense of direction to the journey, but it may be more appropriate ultimately to say that there's a sense of motion. Departure and destination converge into a state of constant arrival, and the urgency of each moment becomes highly focalized. As Vauguy remarked in an interview, I interrogated the past to speak to the present and read the future. Vauguy constructs a non-Euclidean space, which is, perhaps, also myth time. With its celebration of vigilance and resistance, this text of Zakwato positions itself as part of a post-colonial literary canon. Despite its alignment with an antagonistic nationalism, one might see the poem continuing the work of Bernard Dadier, an Ivorian poet who used folk tales to engage with the social and political world of his time. Our godfather, remarks Bois Fidel Diomande, the general director of Valles Editions, which published Zakwato. Josué Gbagbo, who assumed leadership of the Association of Ivorian Writers in 2011, also makes the comparison to Dadier. Gbagbo's complete comment in an interview, though, highlights the way in which the recent ethnic violence is often glossed over as a traditional anti-colonial struggle, a continued confrontation with the West. When asked what he made of the 2011 post-electoral crisis in Côte d'Ivoire, sometimes referred to as the Second Civil War, Gbagbo replied, "There is no post-election crisis in Côte d'Ivoire. What we saw unroll before us is the logical result of a secular harassment. We have this unique and historic opportunity to be contemporaries of Bernard Dadier, and we have no right to ignore what takes place, these concerns about the question of our self-determination. I do not deny the fact that Côte d'Ivoire is in the grip of some contradictions, but I say that some minor questions here are overblown to hide the essential problem. Yet all African countries will have to one day revisit the problem of their relationship to the West. Zakwato does indeed provide a resistance to the West, to the neo-colonialism described by former Ghanaian President Kwame Nkrumah that is at the heart of a globalized marketplace. Vauguy subverts that sense of capitalist time, the characterization of time as something that adds up, a time is money, time is spent, notion of progress. Vauguy's myth time resists such linear accounting. His eternal in the moment mode of composition, where consciousness shuttles between observer, author, and subject, proposes a regard for both the global and the immersed perspective. As poet Nkomo reasons, Vauguy's poetry terroriste knows how to serve the concerns of our time. Africa, claimed and defended by Vauguy, is ordered to tear open its eyes and refuse sleep. But when Vauguy writes, Zakwato goes with his eyelids torn off to knot a new dawn and fight for the new homeland, Africa, Africa. Whose homeland is this? Who are the foreigners that are being watched for? Vauguy's cri de coeur has the ring of Pan-Africanism forwarded by the negritude thinkers. But where negritude thinkers attempted to overcome objections about exclusion, trying to include Arabs and Berbers, Vauguy's approach is otherwise, essentialist. Vauguy's sense of homeland is aligned with a specific political lineage. The authentically African in Côte d'Ivoire, those of my country, belong to Ivoirité. People of Ivoirité, woa, here is Bagnon. People of my country, woa, here is Bagnon. In a 1970 speech, Nagbe Kragbe proposed Ivoirité as a new name for Côte d'Ivoire. Against what had settled into a one-party system, Kragbe proposed a violent dispossession. It is too late at present to dream of elections. We must fight now. We must fight with all our means, even with our bare hands. Blood speaks better to the masses because it is the true language of politics. For Vauguy, Ivoirité becomes a sort of prelapsarian state. Zakwato becomes the model Ivorian. Bagnon means the most beautiful man in Beté. Woa is a traditional reply within and across many tribes in Côte d'Ivoire and continues to be used as a confirmation by people listening to tales. Woa, in this passage, has the additional connotation of warriors at attention. Zakwato, le Bagnon, is the beautiful warrior, the patriot. His heroic awakening is tangled with violent nationalist impulse. If this impulse was intended to drive out Western, or more generally non-African influence, it has sharpened itself still further. A constitutional revision following the 2000 coup and preceding the disputed election that installed Gbagbo as president required any presidential candidate to have proof that both parents were born in Côte d'Ivoire. The legal revision was applied as a cultural policy by Gbagbo supporters. The policy instituted a notion of Ivoirité that had gained currency during Gbagbo's presidency. While the term Ivoirité came into use in 1995 with then-President Henri Konan-Bédier and was intended to reflect the common cultural heritage of all Ivorians, it's acquired a more xenophobic connotation. It defines Ivorianness by the character of southern ethnicities and suggests that northern ethnic groups are more culturally akin to regional neighbors, ethnicities influenced by the Islamic kingdoms that came and went along the Niger River in what's now Mali. This was well before the French arrived, and of course the French-drawn borders divide ethnic groups on every side, except the south, which is coastal. Ivoirité rehearses an anti-colonial sentiment that has expanded to include the descendants of laborers brought from around the region to coastal plantations, and also those who relocated south during the post-independence boom. These workers were effectively stranded as Côte d'Ivoire, like other national liberation states, ran up against adjustments made by G7 countries beginning in the 70s. Ivoirité converts the protests against international instruments of control, such as economic liberalization policies, into a battle about national belonging and cultural citizenship. Zakwato aestheticizes the cultural policy of Ivoirité. At the time of Zakwato's publication, the presidential election that had been deferred for nearly a decade was on the horizon. Gbagbo had maintained the presidency through a disputed election, the first civil war on the country's division, and in 2011, after losing election and refusing to leave office, Gbagbo was removed by French and UN forces amidst the Second Civil War. In his dedications, Vauguy Offers gratitude to Gbagbo, who's also Beté, whose counsel has guided my pen, Vauguy writes, including the epithet Seplu as a term of endearment. Seplu is a pathfinding bird in the Beté culture. The Beté culture supplies Vauguy's kinship to Gbagbo, as well as a stock of myths. Myths he knows because he has long sucked the breasts of the village, its tradition, before coming to settle in the city, explains Nkomo. Vauguy's depiction of what constitutes an Ivorian is rooted in his ethnic heritage, and he seeks to broaden this heritage beyond the Beté culture, positioning Zakwato not only as Beté myth, but as an origin story for the nation of Ivoirité. That Vauguy worked on translating this Beté myth into written French for 25 years is not to indicate that he's a slow producer. To the contrary, I'm suggesting the work of translating Zakwato from the oral Beté into written French was profoundly important to Vauguy, that he's committed to both its aesthetics and its ideological positioning. Thank you, and I hope you have a good conference. If anybody wants to get a hold of me, my email is toddalanfredson@gmail.com.